The boardroom thundered with panic as screens flickered and the voices of French negotiators crackled through the speakers. Millions dangled in the balance. Suits shifted nervously. Whispers rippled like static. All eyes darted from one polished face to another, searching for an answer. And then, from a ladder in the corner, the answer came. Not from a board member, not from a polished VP, but from the man in a grease-stained uniform. His voice rolled in flawless French, steady, commanding, impossible to ignore. The marble chamber froze. Executives who hadn't spared him a glance now stared as if the world had tilted. In that instant, the fate of the company did not rest on the shoulders of its power suits. It rested on the calloused hands of a man sent to change light bulbs. Moments earlier, those same polished voices had mocked him. They joked about the handyman fixing their million-dollar tower, smirking at his uniform, his weary face, his battered toolbox. They dismissed him as background noise, nothing more than a flicker in their marble empire. Yet now, with the deal spiraling toward collapse, their laughter died in their throats. The maintenance man they dismissed corrected complex French phrasing with surgical precision, saving a clause worth millions. Their smirks faltered, pride choking in silence. The same men who rolled their eyes now leaned forward like drowning men reaching for air. The humiliation hung thick, no longer his, but theirs. Every flicker of the fluorescent lights above seemed to mock the arrogance of the powerful, reminding them that dignity can rise from the floor they tried to bury it under.
Victoria Hale had commanded rooms like this for decades, her sharp navy suit and unshakable presence striking fear into competitors and employees alike. She had barked at him to hurry minutes before, barely acknowledging his face. Now she sat frozen, her polished nails tapping once against the oak table before going still. Her empire's lifeline had been salvaged not by her senior executives, not by her vice presidents, not by her strategy, but by a man who wasn't even supposed to sit at the table. Silence held her in place as she realized her authority, her reputation, her wealth were balanced by the calm voice of a man she had overlooked. In that breathless pause, the tower of glass and marble did not belong to her board or her fortune. It belonged, wholly and undeniably, to Daniel Cooper. Far from the polished marble of the tower, Daniel's world was quiet, weighed down by overdue bills stacked like bricks on a kitchen counter. A notice from the landlord, unpaid medical charges, a court letter reminding him of the custody review. All stared back like silent judges. In the corner sat Liam's lunchbox, the Batman sticker peeling at the edges. It was a small thing, yet it spoke volumes, a father's duty packed inside a battered plastic case. Daniel's hands trembled as he flipped through receipts, wondering how he could stretch another paycheck into survival. Every hour mattered, every dollar was a lifeline. The city glittered outside his window, but inside, Daniel measured life by overdue balances and the sound of his son's laughter, the only thing bright enough to drown the hum of struggle, threatening to swallow them whole.
At dawn, Daniel wheeled his cart toward the glass tower, not through the grand lobby where executives paraded, but through the loading dock reserved for deliveries. Ethan Ward had insisted contractors didn't belong on the marble floors. Security treated him like contraband, scanning him twice, waving him along with the indifference reserved for shadows. Suits swept past without looking, shoes clicking against polished stone like metronomes of wealth. His uniform, streaked with grease and wear, marked him as invisible, a man required but not respected. Every glance that slid past him reminded him of his station in their eyes. Yet as he tightened his grip on the toolbox handle, he carried more than tools. He carried dignity buried beneath years of quiet humiliation. The tower never noticed him, but every light that stayed burning in its halls whispered proof of his unseen worth. At the reception desk, Daniel asked about validating his parking ticket, his voice polite, measured, hopeful to shave a few dollars from the long day ahead. The HR clerk barely looked up, lips curling as she said, "Contractors don't qualify. Use the public lot." No apology, no consideration, just dismissal, delivered with the icy efficiency of someone who believed hierarchy was law. Daniel swallowed the sting. A day's wages stretched thin enough to break, yet pride kept him from arguing. Around him, executives breezed through with sleek badges and polished greetings, their parking fully covered, their lunch meetings expensed without thought. To them it was nothing. To him, every dollar was the difference between groceries and debt. He turned away quietly, another reminder that in this tower, his labor was necessary, but his humanity was disposable.
That night, back in their modest apartment, the humiliation faded against the glow of Liam's excitement. The boy laid out cereal boxes wrapped in foil, sketching out support beams for his homemade Mars dome. His eyes lit with the kind of hope only a 10-year-old could hold, unbent by the weight of bills. Daniel crouched beside him, guiding small hands to tape beams into place. For a moment, the world shrank to cardboard, glue, and a child's laughter. Liam's voice rang with pride. "It needs stronger lights for the habitat." Daniel smiled faintly, the words cutting deeper than Liam knew. His son saw him not as the janitor, not as the man scorned in marble towers, but as an engineer, a builder, a protector. In that tiny Mars dome, Daniel's dignity glowed brighter than the city outside their window. Morning cracked against the skyline as the tower awakened, alive with clattering heels, buzzing phones, and attention only money could breed. In the marble lobby, screens flickered once, twice, then darkened. Executives gasped, papers shuffled, urgency swelled. The building's pulse faltered at the worst possible moment. An international call loomed, worth $200 million. Staff scrambled, barking orders, but no solution came. And then, almost unnoticed, Daniel wheeled his cart across the glass floor. His cart squeaked against marble, a sound too humble for a place obsessed with polish. He adjusted his cap, toolbox in hand, stepping into a room where no one wanted him, but everyone would need him. 1,000 lights glared down from ceilings that seemed unreachable, but Daniel knew their secrets. He had walked these shadows too long not to.
Ethan Ward leaned back in his chair, his tailored suit flawless, his voice dripping contempt. He pointed at Daniel's cart, laughing loud enough for the boardroom to hear. "Don't scratch the marble, hero." Laughter rippled like a cruel tide, executives hiding grins behind manicured hands. Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the wires above, refusing to answer. Ethan's smirk widened, savoring the sting of public humiliation. This was how power worked here, not through merit, but through mockery, stripping men down until they believed they were nothing more than their uniforms. Yet Daniel's silence carried weight. He climbed the ladder, steady, each step an act of defiance. He would not give Ethan the satisfaction of crumbling. Every rung he ascended lifted him above the jeers, into a realm where competence spoke louder than cruelty. Victoria Hale swept into the room, her navy suit cutting the air like a blade. Her presence alone silenced whispers. She scanned the darkened screens with irritation, her empire's heartbeat interrupted. "Fix it fast," she ordered, her tone slicing through the room. To her, Daniel was a tool, not a man. He nodded without speaking, gripping the ladder with steady hands. The executives exhaled relief, glad the burden shifted away from them. To them, his existence was transactional. Yet Daniel carried every word like a weight. Each command reinforced the hierarchy etched into marble and glass. He was to move quietly, unseen until problems were solved. But this time, the problem waiting in the wires would demand more than silence. It would demand a voice, one they never expected him to have.
As Daniel opened the panel, sparks hissed, wires snarled like snakes. He traced the circuits with the precision of a man who could not afford mistakes. That's when he saw it. Piggybacked surge protectors, overloaded circuits hidden in plain sight. A shortcut no competent vendor should have allowed, a hazard ignored by those who only saw profits. His mind cataloged it instantly, storing truth like a weapon he might need later. Above him, executives tapped their watches impatiently, blind to the danger beneath their very feet. They demanded speed, unaware of how close they stood to fire. Daniel tightened one connection, steady hands disguising the fury beneath his calm. The tower believed him invisible, but the wires told him otherwise. They whispered of negligence, greed, and the chance to reveal truths hidden behind polished walls. Just as Daniel steadied the breaker, the backup generator groaned to life, barely holding. The screens flickered back, half-lit, revealing the sharp face of a French client on the massive display. His voice exploded through the speakers, impatient, demanding, a storm of words no one in the room understood. Executives paled, their carefully trained masks cracking under pressure. Millions dangled from syllables they couldn't parse. Papers rustled, whispers swirled, but no one stepped forward. Daniel paused mid-repair, his ears catching every word, every nuance. The humiliation of being dismissed still burned inside him. But as the foreign cadence filled the air, he realized the tower's future now sat in the mouth of a man they had overlooked, the man they had mocked. The voice of the janitor was about to decide the fate of giants.
From the ladder, Daniel drew a steady breath, then released words in flawless French. The client froze mid-rant, eyes narrowing on the display. Silence swept the room, heavy and sudden. Executives who moments before mocked him leaned forward in disbelief. Every syllable he spoke was crisp, confident, carrying authority none of them possessed. The marble walls themselves seemed to hold their breath. In that moment, Daniel was no longer invisible, no longer the man pushed through service halls and laughed at. He was the bridge between two worlds, between failure and survival. And as his voice carried across oceans, he rewrote the fate of a contract worth $200 million. The janitor, the man they tried to erase, had become the center of the empire's survival. Victoria Hale sat frozen at the head of the table. Just minutes ago, she dismissed him as a distraction, barking orders without a glance. Now her empire's lifeline rested entirely in his calloused hands. She watched the grease-stained uniform as if seeing it for the first time. The man balancing on the ladder did not stumble, did not falter. His voice carried across borders with precision, calming the furious client, smoothing words that none of her executives could even comprehend. Her board shifted uneasily, waiting for her to speak. But for once, Victoria had no words. Her authority had cracked under the weight of a reality she hadn't prepared for. The janitor was not patching a light. He was patching the very survival of her fortune. The irony pressed against her ribs, heavy and undeniable.
The boardroom erupted in whispers as Daniel stepped down from the ladder, toolbox at his side, still translating effortlessly. Executives traded panicked glances, trying to reconcile the man before them with the skill they witnessed. "Who is he?" hissed one. "He doesn't belong here," muttered another. Ethan Ward leaned back, his jaw tight, voice sharp with venom as he reminded them, "He's a janitor, that's all." Yet every phrase Daniel delivered undermined Ethan's sneer. Every correction, every subtle tone captured in French chipped away at the arrogance that filled the room. Whispers turned from mockery to awe, from laughter to silence. Ethan's smirk cracked. Power was shifting, not in quarterly reports or contracts, but in the presence of a man they had all stepped over on marble floors. For the first time, the boardroom looked at Daniel Cooper and saw. The heavy silence broke when the door creaked open and Maya Collins entered, arms trembling under a tray of coffees. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, her steps unsteady. The tray shook violently as she approached, one cup teetering, threatening to crash onto the polished floor. Daniel moved instantly, catching it mid-fall, his hands steady, voice calm. He guided the tray to safety, his presence soothing the young intern's panic. Executives watched, confused, as if this simple kindness didn't belong in the room. But it mattered. In a chamber where cruelty was currency, Daniel's compassion stood out like firelight in darkness.
Maya's eyes filled with gratitude, her shoulders straightened. For the first time, she felt seen. And Victoria Hale, watching closely, realized this man's strength wasn't just in language or wires, it was in the quiet way he lifted others.
When the room settled again, Victoria's curiosity pierced the silence. She asked where he had learned such French. Daniel's answer carried no pride, only truth. Long nights in restaurant kitchens, where immigrant chefs barked in foreign tongues. Hours bent over dishwater, repeating words until they stuck. A librarian who tucked language tapes behind her desk until his shift ended, allowing him to sit cross-legged on the library floor, headphones pressed tight. He spoke of study without privilege, practice without recognition, grit without reward. The boardroom grew still. Executives who paid for tutors, who carried degrees stamped with prestige, stared at a man who had carved knowledge out of the scraps life handed him. His story wasn't elegant, it was survival. And in that survival lay a dignity none of them could purchase, no matter their wealth. As Daniel continued working, Victoria's eyes drifted to the corner of his bag. A peeling Batman sticker clung stubbornly to the side of a faded lunchbox. The sight snagged her attention. She asked if it belonged to his child. Daniel's voice softened as he spoke of Liam, 10 years old, kind, brilliant in ways the world didn't yet understand. A boy who sketched schematics of spaceships, labeling each bolt, searching for order in chaos. The room shifted with his words, the grandeur of the marble fading under the power of a father's pride. For a fleeting second, a ghost of a smile touched Victoria's face before vanishing. The Batman lunchbox, worn and frayed, was no corporate accessory. It was proof of love, of responsibility, of sacrifice. It was the anchor of a man who carried the weight of tomorrow.
Ethan Ward saw his control slipping and struck back with corporate precision. He slid a thick contract across the table, an NDA laced with traps. Buried inside was a non-compete clause that could choke Daniel's future, cutting off opportunities beyond this room. Executives smirked, assuming the janitor would sign blindly. But Daniel read every line, years of drifting between jobs teaching him the cost of careless ink. He placed a finger on the clause and refused. Ethan's smirk widened, ready to humiliate him again. But Victoria, intrigued, ordered the lines struck. The board shifted uneasily, watching power bend in directions they hadn't anticipated. Ethan's plan to box Daniel into silence backfired. Instead, the man he tried to bind had just proven himself sharper than the lawyers paid to write those words. Ethan turned vicious. His voice rose, filling the room with cruel laughter. He painted Daniel as a handyman pretending to be more, mocking the idea of a janitor negotiating contracts. Executives chuckled nervously, feeding on the spectacle. Daniel stood still, absorbing every word, refusing to react. His silence was heavier than Ethan's noise, a refusal to descend to his level. For Ethan, humiliation was a weapon, but for Daniel, dignity was armor. The board shifted uncomfortable, others entertained, but the contrast was undeniable. One man relied on arrogance to assert power. The other stood with nothing but composure, and it was enough to turn the laughter into something hollow. The humiliation no longer belonged to Daniel. It clung to Ethan, bitter and transparent. Power was slipping, and he knew it.
While the boardroom simmered with tension, Daniel leaned forward and calmly revealed the truth he had seen earlier. The surge protectors piggybacked in the bullpen were a fire waiting to ignite. Executives stiffened, realizing the danger beneath their polished floors. For months, vendors had been paid to ensure safety, yet here was proof of negligence. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. Daniel spoke with steady authority, outlining risks, exposing what others ignored. Silence gripped the room as executives considered the disaster narrowly avoided. They had mocked him for grease stains and worn tools, but he had seen what their wealth had missed. His words hung in the air, undeniable, unshakable. The invisible man had exposed the rock at the heart of their empire. The humiliation spread, not upward this time, but sideways across polished suits. Victoria leaned forward, her sharp eyes cutting through the silence. She asked if he had also caught the bluff in the French negotiator's demands. Daniel nodded, explaining calmly that the client softened on timing, but never on price. He cared about control, not speed. His insight reframed the entire negotiation. Executives blinked, startled by what they had missed. Victoria studied him with a gaze that no longer dismissed, no longer mocked. It wasn't luck, it was precision. It was the ability to hear what others couldn't, to see what they refused to. For the first time, Victoria recognized the rare strength before her, a man whose steady hands didn't just fix wires, but unraveled deceptions. And in that recognition, Daniel's place in the room shifted again. He was no longer an accident. He was indispensable.
As negotiations stretched, a city inspector arrived unannounced, clipboard in hand, warning that safety checks were mandatory. If systems failed, the tower would empty and the deal would die instantly. Executives paled, panic prickling again. Ethan smirked, whispering that the janitor's tricks would crumble under scrutiny. The inspector's eyes scanned the panels, alarms humming softly, waiting to betray the truth. Time thinned. The deal hung suspended, not just on translation, but on the hum of circuits, on whether Daniel's hands could keep the tower alive. He adjusted his cap, heart pounding steady as his breath. This wasn't just about wires or contracts anymore. It was about proving that invisible work built the very foundation of their empire. The inspection had begun, and all eyes were on the man who wasn't supposed to matter. The hum deepened into a roar as alarms screamed. The backup generator, miswired by negligence, began to falter. Lights flickered violently, threatening to plunge the tower into chaos. Executives bolted from their seats, papers scattering, voices rising in panic. The inspector scribbled furiously, his expression dark. Ethan smirked, ready to declare the tower unsafe. But Daniel didn't move with fear. He ran straight toward the panel, toolbox clattering, sleeves rolled. His eyes locked on the snarling wires, the sparks biting at his hands. He had seconds to act, no room for hesitation. Every flicker threatened fire, threatened lives, threatened to erase the deal entirely. Executives shouted from a safe distance, powerless. Only the man they called janitor stood in the storm. The second surge had come, and Daniel was the only one between them and collapse.
Sweat streaked Daniel's brow as sparks hissed around him. His hands moved with the precision of years spent making do with nothing, the steadiness of a man who could not afford mistakes. With one hand he rerouted the breaker, with the other he steadied live wires, guiding them back into balance. Alarms wailed, the inspector loomed, executives watched with bated breath. Simultaneously, Daniel's voice carried across the speakerphone, translating clauses, smoothing tension, buying precious seconds. It was a balancing act between fire and language, between circuits and survival. Then, with a sharp twist, the breaker snapped into place. The lights surged back, steady and strong. The alarms silenced. The inspector's pen paused mid-mark. He nodded once. Safe. Relief flooded the boardroom. The janitor had not only saved the deal, he had saved the tower itself. The victory was undeniable, but Ethan Ward refused to yield. His composure cracked, fury spilling across the boardroom. He shouted that it was insane, that a janitor had no place in negotiations, no place in leadership. His voice shook with venom as he warned Victoria she was gambling the company's image on a man who belonged with wires, not contracts. Silence followed his outburst, the kind of silence that condemned. Victoria's voice cut cold as steel. She declared Daniel belonged wherever he added value, and yesterday he had added more than anyone in the room. Ethan's face drained, his mask crumbling. He slammed the folder shut, storming from the room, leaving behind a tremble in the glass walls. For once, the humiliation did not cling to Daniel. It clung to Ethan, unraveling his power with every step.
As calm settled back into the boardroom, Victoria admitted something few CEOs ever revealed. If the deal had fallen, layoffs were inevitable. Hundreds of jobs, entire night shift crews, families that relied on steady paychecks would have been erased. The laughter of executives earlier in the day echoed in contrast to the weight of this truth. Daniel had not just saved a contract, he had saved livelihoods. Workers who would never know his name, who would never see the grease stains on his uniform, owed their stability to him. The man mocked in the boardroom had quietly protected the invisible workforce, just like himself. His victory was not measured in stock prices or contracts. It was measured in grocery bills met, in homes kept, in children fed. The empire's survival had been secured by the dignity of one overlooked man. Later, Daniel presented a single-page proposal he had drafted with care. It outlined the surge hazard, a plan to repair it properly, not patch it. Simple bullet points, clear milestones, costs a fraction of what vendors charged. Victoria read it silently, her face unreadable. Then, she signed it on the spot. The sound of her pen scratching the page carried more weight than any applause. For Daniel, it wasn't about money or recognition. It was about finally being heard. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from relief. Years of invisibility had culminated in a moment where his work, his insight, his worth could no longer be ignored. The proposal was approved, the tower's lights were safe, and Daniel's dignity stood taller than the marble walls that had tried to keep him small. That evening, Daniel returned home to the smell of grilled cheese and the glow of his son's excitement. Liam rushed forward, cardboard Mars dome in his hands, foil crinkling with pride. "Dad, look! It has a landing bay now!" Daniel knelt, pulling the boy into his arms, the weight of the day softening into love. At the table, Liam spoke of orbits and habitats, his small hands sketching futures brighter than their kitchen lamp. Daniel listened, the words soothing him more than any corporate praise ever could. When Liam insisted the dome needed stronger lights, Daniel smiled. He had spent the day keeping towers alive, but here, in this apartment, was the true reason. Not polished boardrooms or contracts, just a boy who believed his father could build a world strong enough to hold him safe. The next morning, Daniel walked into the tower, not through the delivery dock, but through the front lobby, his cleanest shirt pressed, his hair combed back. Security hesitated, but Victoria Hale appeared, her voice firm as she declared, "He's with me." The room fell silent. Executives shifted uneasily. The marble empire, recognizing the man they once mocked, now stood among them. Above, the lights shone steady, circuits balanced, danger erased. Daniel's phone buzzed, a message from Liam. "Don't forget, we need to finish the Mars dome tonight." He typed back with a faint smile. "Keep it ready, we're building stronger tomorrow." As he stepped deeper into the tower, he carried not just tools, not just skill, but dignity, carved from years of being unseen. Tomorrow no longer belonged to the powerful alone. Tomorrow belonged to him.